The era of assumed global stability has collapsed. Across Europe, the return of high-intensity conventional warfare has left shattered hardware scattered across combat zones. That geopolitical friction has immediately bled into global commerce. Decades-old supply chains for essential materials have ground to a sudden halt. Compounding this is a surge in economic protectionism. Key trading partners like the United States have deployed aggressive tariffs, specifically targeting heavy manufacturing sectors, placing extreme pressure on Canadian steel and aluminum exports. For the average citizen, these massive geopolitical shifts register at the checkout counter. The disruption of global trade networks has driven up the cost of imported goods, squeezing household budgets across the country. At the state level, the threat is territorial. Decades of underfunding have left the military reliant on aging equipment. This presents a critical vulnerability along Canada's vast, resource-rich northern borders, right as polar ice routes become increasingly contested by foreign powers. Relying on the rest of the world to remain peaceful and economically open is no longer a viable strategy. That reliance has left personal bank accounts drained and sovereign borders highly exposed. To stabilize the economy, Prime Minister Mark Carney's government initiated an immediate response. On one side of the ledger, they enacted a broad tax cut for the middle class, a move that intentionally slashes the amount of revenue flowing into the federal government. On the exact same day, they announced a massive $81.8 billion increase in national defense spending to rebuild the military over the next decade. Maintaining this level of defense spending, the highest in decades, usually requires significant tax revenue. Yet the government is moving in the opposite direction, shrinking its own tax base at the same time. These policies function together to create a circular flow of capital. By lowering the cost of living while funding domestic production, the state is attempting to build an economic loop that is less vulnerable to external disruption. We see this strategy in this 2025 tax bulletin. The government deliberately reduced the lowest tax bracket from 15% down to 14%. Through this implementation, an average two-income family keeps an extra $840 every year. They paired this with targeted interventions, a GST rebate for first-time buyers, and a tax-free carbon rebate directly deposited for small businesses. To balance the lost revenue, the Canada Revenue Agency shifted to an aggressive digital compliance model. Defaulting to online-only correspondence eliminates massive paper overhead and tightens the timeline for corporate payments. Leaving an extra $840 in a family's checking account guarantees that money will be spent locally, on groceries, services, and domestic goods. This precise injection of liquidity stimulates the internal Canadian economy straight from the ground up. The second pillar relies on the 2026 Defense Industrial Strategy, allocating $6.6 billion to scale up domestic manufacturing capacity. This ensures that massive projects like heavy naval construction happen inside the country. To execute this, they created the Defense Investment Agency, or DIA. Its sole mandate is bypassing traditional bureaucratic bottlenecks and drastically accelerating the timeline for military acquisitions. The strict build, partner, buy framework prioritizes domestic production. Even when buying foreign technology, contracts require those companies to reinvest back into Canadian suppliers. Mandating that capital stays within our borders, projects adding 125,000 jobs and driving defense sector revenues upward by 240%. This guarantees a domestic buyer for the country's own resources. It protects physical supply chains, ensuring that the critical minerals, steel, and aluminum extracted from Canadian soil are processed and utilized by Canadian factories. This framework uses federal procurement to subsidize the expansion of heavy industry. Every dollar spent on a hull or an engine is repurposed as an investment in the national industrial base. By 2035, the government will inject $180 billion directly into defense procurement. Because of strict build, partner, buy rules, that initial capital cascades outward. Contracts awarded to primary builders require hiring local subcontractors, generating an estimated $125 billion in secondary economic benefits. That downstream capital heavily subsidizes research in advanced sectors. Companies developing aerospace technologies, artificial intelligence, and autonomous drones receive the funding required to scale their operations and hire highly skilled workers. The loop closes here. The state funds the defense industry. The defense industry builds factories and hires engineers. Those engineers represent the exact middle class that was just empowered by the targeted tax cuts. The tax code and the military budget are actively feeding each other. Capital is generated, spent, and multiplied without ever leaving the national borders. Canada is structurally abandoning the era of passive globalization. The government is instructing a resilient state model, built on the premise that a country must be able to sustain itself when international systems fail. Industrial capacity is the foundation of modern security. The strategy specifically prioritizes Canadian ownership of intellectual property, ensuring that the resulting patents and technical data remain under domestic control, so the military isn't reliant on foreign permissions to maintain its own equipment. To keep those supply chains running, the state needs a highly employed, financially secure population, capable of both producing the technology and driving the local economy forward. The $840 returned to a family and the billion-dollar contracts awarded to a shipyard are coordinated components of a single blueprint. They represent a long-term commitment to maintaining Canadian sovereignty in a volatile world.